why is it important to have big themes? And then what is a good thematic? Um,
Yeah, yeah. You know, we, that's another thing that we're obsessed with. Of course, to us, it starts on the front end, but we try to keep, carry those themes into the back ends, so there's that sort of continuity. Um, and we're obsessed with those. I learned, I learned a lot of what I know from Bill Bonner and Porter, and Mark Ford, who are just, constantly preaching the importance of the great, big, enormous, compelling idea. And, I've defined it in my own head, and, to our staff is, you know, is is this idea going to change the world? Is it going to affect billions of people? Uh, you know, would 60 Minutes do, multiple shows about this? Would you watch a documentary on it? And that big monster theme, it's almost never like a 6 month thing. It is a tectonic shift in how the world works. And those tectonic shifts, they don't occur over 6 months. They often don't even occur over 6 years. It takes 10, 15 years sometimes. So, like, for example, those big mega themes can be technology, technological revolutions like the internet in the 90s, definitely a huge one. If you want to go back to like the 20s and 30s, it's electricity. Electricity completely changed the world. If we were doing newsletters back then, we would be writing about the new technology of electricity. And now, here in 2023, it's AI. So very often it's a technological revolution. And since we are, technologists, down to our toes, that's often what we write about. But a big theme can also be macroeconomic in nature. Like, for example, for most of the 20th century, the Chinese economy was was a mess. It had foreign invasions, it had civil wars, it had a disastrous bout with communism. But in the 80s and 90s, it started freeing up. The country had peace. They started embracing business, and kind of all of a sudden, 1 billion people entered the global economy, starting from a very, very, very low level of wealth. And so China became the world's workshop. China and Western companies started investing hundreds of billions and then trillions of dollars into China, and it began consuming huge amounts of the world's resources like oil, natural gas, zinc, nickel, tin, and that shot commodity prices way, way higher, hundreds of percent higher, like copper, oil, coal. And since commodity producers are leverage plays on the commodity price itself, that sent, the price of oil companies, copper companies, uranium companies, it sent those through the roof. And it really changed global capital flows. It changed how Western companies did business. China entering the global economy was disastrous for a lot of U.S. manufacturing jobs. And so there's this thing that's happening it's changing the price of gas. It's causing your uncle to lose his job, and now he's very upset. For investors, it's sending stocks through the roof, and it's changing geopolitics as we know it. That's a big, big freaking idea. And, at Stansberry, back when that was happening in the early 2000s, we were writing about that. So macroeconomic, or technological, there's a few other lesser flavors, but the beauty of the big theme is that the space ads you write, the lift notes you write, the headlines you write, they're extraordinarily compelling, and they're outrageously interesting because the story is outrageously interesting. They are 100% authentic, and they're incredible, and they catch your attention. And they're ideas that you'll tell your golfing buddies or your family about. Like, did you know China is doing this, or did you know there's this new thing called the internet, or did you know that AI is doing this? Another component of that big idea is when we see non-investors losing their minds over it, we know it's probably a big idea. When my friends from high school that, they almost never invest, when they're calling me up and saying, hey, what's going on with this? I know it's a big idea. So that's kind of like part of the art of knowing if it's a big idea or not. So, and the beauty, another great part of it is once you develop the institutional expertise about that idea and you develop an archive of copy that's effective front end and back end, is these things usually last years. So with that body of copy I was talking about with technological change and its effect on wealth inequality, we have to this day, we dropped that copy in 2019. We are still using parts of it today here in 2023. So you get these enormous returns on time and energy invested because it's this very long-legged idea that plays out over years. And as long as people are interested in it, you just keep, of course, you're coming up with new leads, new versions of it, but that core of the copy, like the ideas, the whole company develops this institutional knowledge, and you're able to leverage and rerun parts of your old copy. Like you get these extraordinary returns on time invested. So it's just a beautiful thing. We're obsessed with those. I learned a lot of what I know from Bill Bonner and Porter, and Mark Ford, who are just constantly preaching the importance of the great, big, enormous, compelling idea. And I've defined it in my own head, and to our staff is is this idea going to change the world? Is it going to affect billions of people? Would 60 Minutes do multiple shows about this? Would you watch a documentary on it?
Why is it important to have big themes? And then what is a good thematic?
Yeah. That's another thing that we're obsessed with. Of course, to us, it starts on the front end, but we try to keep, carry those themes into the back ends, so there's that sort of continuity.